What's up, guys? We're on chapter 4 now. Chapter 4, part 1 coming at you. Enjoy the chapter, and we'll do the same thing, 3 parts. Title of the chapter is Who Has Won to Mastership? Eh? What I say? I speak true when I say that Buck two devils. This was Francois' speech next morning when he discovered Spitz missing and Buck covered with wounds. He drew him to the fire and by its light pointed them out. "Dat Spitz fight like a devil," said Perrault, as he surveyed the gaping rips and cuts. "And dat Buck fight like 2 devils," was Francois' answer. "And now we made good time. No more Spitz, no more trouble, sure." While Perrault packed the camp outfit and loaded the sled, the dog driver proceeded to harness the dogs. Buck trotted up to the place Spitz would have occupied as leader, but Francois, not noticing him, brought Sol-leks to the coveted position. In his judgment, Sol-leks was the best lead dog left. Buck sprang upon Sol-leks in a fury, driving him back and standing in his place. "Hey, hey!" Francois cried, slapping his thighs gleefully. "Look at that Buck. Him killed that Spitz. Him think to take the job." "Go away, Chook!" he cried, but Buck refused to budge. He took Buck by the scruff of the neck, and though the dog growled threateningly, dragged him to one side and replaced Sol-leks. The old dog did not like it and showed painfully that he was afraid of Buck. Francois was obdurate. But when he turned his back, Buck again displaced Sol-leks, who was not at all unwilling to go. Francois was angry. "Now, by gar, I fix you," he cried, coming back with a heavy club in his hand. Buck remembered the man in the red sweater and retreated slowly, nor did he attempt to charge in when Sol-leks was once again more brought forward. But he circled just beyond the range of the club, snarling with bitterness and rage. And while he circled, he watched the club so as to dodge it, if thrown by Francois, for he was become wise in the way of clubs. The driver went about his work, and he called to Buck when he was ready to put him in his old place in front of Dave. Buck retreated 2 or 3 steps. Francois followed him up, whereupon he again retreated. After some time of this, Francois threw down the club, thinking that Buck feared a thrashing. But Buck was in open revolt. He wanted not to escape a clubbing, but to have the leadership. It was his by right. He had earned it, and he would not be content with less. Perrault took a hand. Between them, they ran him about for the better part of an hour. They threw clubs at him. He dodged. They cursed him and his fathers and mothers before him, and all his seed to come after him, down to the remotest generation, and every hair on his body and drop of blood in his veins, and he answered curse with snarl and kept out of their reach. He didn't try to run away, but retreated around and around the camp, advertising plainly that when his desire was met, he would come in and be good. Francois sat down and scratched his head. Perrault looked at his watch and swore. Time was flying, and they should have been out on the trail an hour ago. Francois scratched his head again. He shook it and grinned sheepishly at the courier, who shrugged his shoulders in a sign that they were beaten. Then Francois went up to where Sol-leks stood and called to Buck. Buck laughed, as dogs laugh, yet kept his distance. Francois unfastened Sol-leks' traces and put him back in his old place. The team stood harnessed to the sled in an unbroken line, ready for the trail. There was no place for Buck save at the front. Once more, Francois called, and once more, Buck laughed and kept away. "Throw down the club," Perrault commanded. Francois complied, whereupon Buck trotted in, laughing triumphantly, and swung around into position at the head of the team. His traces were fastened, the sled broken out, and with both men running, they dashed out on to the river trail. Highly as the dog driver had forevalued Buck with his 2 devils, he found, while the day was yet young, that he had undervalued. At a bound, Buck took up the duties of leadership, and where judgment was required and quick thinking and quick acting, he showed himself the superior even of Spitz, of whom Francois had never seen an equal. But it was in giving the law and making his mates live up to it that Buck excelled. Dave and Sol-leks did not mind the change in leadership. It was none of their business. Their business was to toil and toil mightily in the traces. So long as that were not interfered with, they did not care what happened. Billy, the good-natured, could lead for all they cared so long as he kept order. The rest of the team, however, had grown unruly during the last days of Spitz, and their surprise was great now that Buck proceeded to lick them into shape. Pike, who pulled at Buck's heels and who never put an ounce more of his weight against the breastband than he was compelled to do, was swiftly and repeatedly shaken for loafing. And, before the first day was done, he was pulling more than ever in his life. The first night in camp, Joe the sour one was punished roundly, a thing that Spitz had never succeeded in doing. Buck simply smothered him by virtue of superior weight and cut him up till he ceased snapping and began to whine for mercy. The general tone of the team picked up immediately. It recovered its old-time solidarity, and once more the dogs leaped as one dog in the traces. At the rink rapids, 2 native huskies, Teak and Kuna, were added, and the celerity with which Buck broke them in took away Francois's breath. "Never such a dog as that Buck," he cried. "No, never. Him worth $1,000, by gar. Eh? What you say, Perot?" And Perot nodded. He was ahead of the record then, and gaining day by day. The trail was in excellent condition, well packed and hard, and there was no new fallen snow with which to contend. It was not too cold. The temperature dropped to 50 below zero and remained there the whole trip. The men rode and ran by turn, and the dogs were kept on the jump, but with infrequent stoppages. Okay, that will end the part 1 of Chapter 4. Part 2 and 3 are coming up soon. Thanks for listening.